I wrote a book when I was 8. We were gonna read it and review it. Oh, this is the best thing I've ever read. Hi, doggy. You want to read the book, doggy? Do you want to read the really bad book with me, doggy? So, when I was growing up, I really loved fantasy books. I really loved Lord of the Rings. I really loved Narnia, all those types of things. I loved the Lord of the Rings movies. I would watch them all the time. I even started, thank you, doggy. I even started a Lord of the Rings club at school. That's how much I loved it. So one year at camp, I decided I'm gonna write a novel that's as good as Lord of the Rings. And I did, and it's amazing. And this looks longer than it really is. It's 40 pages, which is a lot for an 8-year-old. It's pretty impressive. So I'm gonna read it and review it. This is The Sword Master. It's in parts. Part 1. Vicchio in the year 1027. Sir, are you sure we should do this? Why, do you disagree? We can stop him. No, we can't. Not yet, at least. Sir, he's coming. Yes, put one here. And that's part 1. That's the prologue that I wrote. So that's the prologue that I wrote. I didn't say who was talking, I didn't say where they were, I didn't say what they were doing, because I thought it would be like a movie where you just see mysterious figures doing something to set up the plot, but I didn't write about what they were doing or why. Vetro Saint in the year 1099, a couple years later. Barnaby, it's time. Yes, but who? Lance. Lance the stable boy? Yes, after all, his great-grandfather was master of the Sword of Destiny. I want to point out that any spelling errors I just scribbled over. Shall I inform him? Yes, Barnaby. So Barnaby set out to find Lance in the town. Clean out the barn, Lance. Yes, master, Lance said as he walked out to the barn. He turned his head to the street and rushed back inside. Master Frederick, the king's advisor is coming! Just then, there was a knock on the door. Lance opened it. Lance, the king requests your presence, Barnaby said. I trust that is fine with you, Master Frederick. Well, I mean, yes, he said, confused. Then Lance, we're off to the castle. Yes, sir. As they walked, Lance asked, why am I requested, sir? You will know soon enough, Barnaby replied. It's interesting that this stable boy knows the king's advisor and recognized him on the street. As they entered the castle, Lance looked around in awe. He had never seen so many fancy things in his life. Kneel to his majesty the king, Barnaby whispered to Lance, and Lance bowed. Lance, rise, the king said. Have you ever heard of General Lie and the Dark War? I wanted to have a cool bad guy name like Sauron, so I came up with General Lie, but it's spelled L-Y-E. Ooh. No, sir, I have not, Lance replied. Then let me tell you, he said. Come, Lance, you as well, Barnaby. The king led them to a small room with a large painting on the wall. There were once 5 swords, almost identical, except each had a different colored jewel at the bottom. Blue, red, clear's not a color, and black. But one had a half-black, half-white jewel. Fascinating. These swords had names, lost in time, now called the Sword of Ice and Water, the Sword of Fire, the Sword of Light, the Sword of Darkness, and the Sword of Destiny. The king stared at Lance. Are any of those names familiar to you? Yes, Lance said. My great-grandfather once owned the Sword of Destiny, but he's never heard of the war? Lance. Lance, do you see that chest in the corner? Yes, sir. Open it. Lance walked over and opened the chest. In it was the broken tip of a sword. Lance, I've been told you have skills with a dagger. Yes, sir. Who told the king that some random stable boy had skills with a dagger? If he's the chosen one, why hasn't he been being trained his whole life? Why are they just now taking him from the stable? Do you know what that is? No, sir. It is the end of the Sword of Destiny. Matona, as it is named. See there on the tip? Lance looked, and there was the word Matona carved into the sword. Lance, you have power. You can handle all 5 swords. Lance stood in silence. Is he just gonna hold them in his mouth and his hands like Zorro in One Piece? But he's a kid. We can fashion that blade into a dagger. Lance asked, why? Lance, the king paused. You must get all 5 swords before corruption does. Whose corruption? The Dark Lord. I'll do it. Good. I'll make the blade a dagger for you. Oh wow, what a nice king giving our child a weapon. Lance spent the night in the castle. Frederick was informed. I'm glad Frederick was informed. He would be worrying sick about his apprentice. When he awoke, the king was in his room in a chair, holding a dagger in a sheath. Here, Matona is finished. He handed the dagger to Lance. And then it's a picture of the dagger. Wow! The art's amazing. First to the Ice Temple, the king said. Sir, you never told me the story of General Lai and the war. Well, when we beat corruption, you can ask Lai. Sir, yes, I think I should train first. Yeah. No time. No time. So Lance and the king went into the stable. Lance, choose a horse. I choose her, he said, pointing to a brown horse with a white mane. Her name is Jupiter, said someone. I never wrote who was talking. I didn't think it was very important. I'm a very angsty writer. The Ice Temple is where? In the mountains. Where in the mountains? No one knows. Wrong, said a voice in the back of the room. I know where it is because I put it in there. But you never told me, said the king. Only this boy is worthy. Then tell me, old man. The man went and whispered, the old hut is on Glisse Mountain. Go and sit in the chair bolted to the floor and stare out the door. Thank you, sir, Lance said. Lance, the king said, here is your bag and shield. Lance took them and headed up to the mountain. Oh. He's heading up to the horse. And headed up to Jupiter and climbed on. Part 2, the mountain. As Lance rode through the town, he was very worried. I'm very worried for this child, too. That he would not come back. Oh. I made it dark and edgy. It's silly, I'll be fine, he thought. But then he thought, what's guarding the sword? He was scared it was a monster, or worse, corruption, or lie. Then Jupiter stopped, and Lance looked up, and there was Glisse Mountain. That's the journey. He turned Jupiter to the path and started his dangerous trek up the mountain. After 3 hours, Lance was 1/3 of the way up. He sighed. Up he went. After 2 more hours, he was halfway up. He pushed on up and up. Jupiter was getting tired. Then he was at the peak. Isn't that thrilling? As I recall, the Fellowship of the Ring had a chapter where they climbed up a mountain, and it was just as amazingly detailed as this journey here was too. I cannot wait for the film adaptation of The Sword Master. He saw the hut. It was bigger than he expected it to be. It could hold Lance and Jupiter. They both entered. There was a fire in the fireplace. It was warm. Lance sat in the chair and stared out the door. Then, out of the mist, a crystal temple appeared. I think I stole the hut on a mountain with a chair thing from Adventure Time, but I'm not sure. Pretty sure it's the one where Finn gets cursed eyes. He stood, tied Jupiter to the chair, and put some hay on it and entered the temple. I'm glad there was hay for the horse. I'm glad that whatever monster is guarding the temple thought in advance, oh, adventurers are going to bring their horses up this dangerous mountain, so they're going to need something to eat. That's forethought, and that's really good detail in writing. Such good world building. Part 3, Sword. Lance looked around. The whole room was crystal. Then Lance headed to the crystal staircase. He went down. As he went, the crystal went away and turned into brick, then rock, and then he was on flat ground. Then, out of the dark, a madman with punching knives on his hands appeared. The man punched Lance. Lance raised his shield. The left knife shattered. The man punched harder. Lance blocked with his shield and cut the right hand off. The man screamed in pain and ran into the shadows, screaming. Pleasant. Lance looked at Matona. The blood disappeared. Lance walked into the darkness, and a flash of light came from the dagger and lit up the room. Lance heard a screech. Now, this is my favorite line in all of book history. My friends and family and girlfriend still reference this line. "You dare show light here? I've been in the dark so long, I've adjusted." Lance stood, mouth in awe. There stood the strangest creature he had ever seen, and then it says in parentheses, describe the creature later. And then there's this picture. So I'll let you describe it. Without warning, the creature swung his smallest blade. Lance ducked. The monster hit again with the little sword. Lance cut into the arm and pulled out the knife. The monster weakly swung the sword with an injured arm. Lance hit the arm again. The monster screamed. It swung with a bigger sword, and then Lance saw, on the blade, the name Pluto, coldest planet in the Milky Way. Out of the tip shot ice. Lance raised his shield, but one ice chip scraped him. It was small, but it hurt. He screamed and sliced the sword of ice and water out of his hand and used it to freeze the monster. As Lance left the temple, it crumbled into the ground, and at the request of the old man, Lance took Jupiter out of the hut and burnt down the small house. I don't remember the old man telling him to do that. I think this man just burnt down another man's house. Lance is an arsonist, confirmed. Part 4, Dark Lord. So the boy has Pluto. I guess he will go after Hawk now? Yes, my lord. Don't stumble, lie. Sir, Lance is trying to bring peace to the world. There is no peace. Part 5, Return. How gripping. How complex. Never since Voldemort, since Darth Vader, has there been a villain as complex and interesting and well-spoken, I might add, as the Dark Lord Corruption. Part 5, Return. Lance returned to the castle, feeling triumphant and unbeatable. As he entered the king's castle, he took out Pluto to show it to the king. Magnificent, the king said. It is beautiful, and it's almost clear. My lord, Lance asked. Yes, Lance. I would like some proper training with a sword. Why, yes, of course, dear boy. While you were away, I got the best swordsman in Vetro Saints to come and train you. My. His name is Cinder Man! Or at least that's what he calls himself, the king said. Part 6, Cinder Man. I don't think I knew how chapter breaks worked. Cinder Man was tall, about 6'5". He was about 40, and his black hair had streaks of gray. He had a black goatee and black mustache. You are Lance? He asked. Yes, Lance replied. You are much younger than I expected. I am only 15, Lance said. 15? The country, no, the world's fate rests in the hands of a child, Cinderman shouted. I have to make you better than good. I must make you best. Best! I learn quickly, sir. I hope so, Cinderman sighed. Part 7, Training. Okay, what do you know about fighting? Cinderman asked. I know a common misconception is that you aim for the enemy's sword, said Lance. Good. That is a good start. You aim for the body, not the blade, Cinderman said happily. So my brother is 7 years older than me, so when I was 8, he was taking fencing, and that was like the cool thing that he learned and taught me when we would play with our lightsabers, because I kept trying to make it look cool, so I would try to hit his sword, and he would go, aim for the body, not the blade. So I worked that into my book as a tribute to my beloved big brother, who I think made fun of my book, but I can't remember. Go pick up that little wooden training sword, he said, pointing to a rack of training weapons. Yes, sir, Lance said. Now, we will first see where you are in fighting right now, Cinderman explained. So hit at me. Lance attacked Cinderman. Cinderman parried. Lance stabbed. Cinderman dodged. Lance swung. Cinderman blocked. Lance jumped and hit straight down. Cinderman dodged. Okay, now play the defensive, Cinderman said. Cinderman swung, and Lance felt it in his arm. It stung. Cinderman hit again. This time, Lance parried. I want to point out that I spelled parried P-A-I-R-A-D-E, because I knew the word from my big brother, but I didn't know how to write in French. Good! You're catching on, Lance. Cinderman swung, Lance dodged and hit back and landed a blow on Cinderman. He is the chosen one! Part 8, The Dead Dusk Riders. So I needed orcs. More specifically, I wanted ring wraiths. So I called them the Dead Dusk Riders. World building. Lance and Cinderman trained for months on end, and Lance began to think of Cinderman as a father to him. Of course. As Lance slept, he heard a beat of hooves outside. Then he heard the warning bell from the castle. Lance darted up, grabbed Matona and Pluto, and raced downstairs. Cinderman stood at the door. Lance, come here, he beckoned, but there was something off about him. Lance, don't! Shouted a voice from the shadow as a ball of fire hit Cinderman in the stomach. Cinderman screeched an inhumane scream and turned into a cloaked figure and drew its sword. From the shadow emerged the real Cinderman, who held Hawk, the sword of fire. Audible gasp. What a twist. This is Hawk, he yelled, and I am its master, he screamed, as a huge blast of fire shot the creature. Lance, that was a dead dusk rider, a servant of lie. You had Hawk the whole time, Lance shouted. You know what? Yeah. Yes, said Cinderman, and I have had it since I was your age. So come and help me fight the other 14 riders. How does he know that? Well, I had to one-up Tolkien, who had 9, so I had 14. They rushed outside, shooting ice and fire from their swords. I used the wrong there. Oh. What can Matona do? Asked Cinderman. I have no idea, Lance said. So he took the dagger out. It glowed. Then a huge explosion happened, and 3 riders fell down dead. Lance did it again. 3 riders stood standing, but Matona was out of power. We can take them, Lance shouted over the noise of the bell, and all the villagers fleeing. Yes, we can, Cinderman shouted, then sliced the head off one rider. The other one was tough, though, and the last one was nowhere to be seen. I'm sorry, I spelled it wrong. The last one was nowhere to be seen. Lance cut the arm off the rider as Cinderman stabbed him in the chest. The rider fell. Ah! Cinderman screamed in pain. The last rider had stabbed him in the chest from behind. No! Lance screamed. Then, in a mix of terror and anger, he sliced the arm, then the legs, then the head off of the rider. Are you sad that Cinderman's dead? Me too, doggy. Lance! Take Hawk. It is your destiny, Cinderman said as he died. Cinderman, no! Don't die! Please don't die, Lance cried. Then a blue, white, and red light filled the area as a green light came out of Cinderman's wound and went into Hawk. His soul was saved! He was forever inside Hawk and able to speak with Lance. That's a horrible existence. Part 9, Illumo, Sword of Light. Cinderman asked Lance to his new sword. That's how he views his father figure, as his new sword. Call me Hawk, Cinderman replied. Hawk, where is the next sword? And what is it? Lance asked. Is there like a particular order they need to get the swords? Did I have like a thought process? Because Aang had to master the elements in a certain order to teach him discipline and responsibility, but these are swords. I don't understand. The next sword is Illumo, Sword of Light, Hawk replied. Okay, where is it? In the Temple of Darkness, so it can keep balance in the world, Hawk said. Part 10, the weapon. Corruption, Lai asked. What lie? The boy has Hawk. I know, Corruption replied. But, Lai said, I finished the weapon that will decide the war. Let me see it, Corruption said, as Lai took out a long metal tube with a handle and a crossbow-like trigger. I call it, Lai started. The gun. The gun. Part 11, the philosophers. So how do we find the Temple of Darkness, Lance asked. I have no idea, Hawk replied. Is he holding the sword, or is the sword just talking from his belt? Is there anyone who does? Probably, Hawk answered. Like who? Lance asked. A priest? A rabbi? A philosopher? Hawk guessed. Anyone sacred. Doggy wanna go outside. Doggy was just hungry. I'm sure you can hear him eating. So how do we find the Temple of Darkness? Lance asked. I have no idea, Hawk replied. Is there anyone who does? Probably, Hawk answered. Like who? Lance asked. A priest? A rabbi? A philosopher? Hawk guessed. Anyone sacred. Okay, is there one of those in town? Lance asked. There's a philosopher, Hawk said. Okay, who? Lance said. His name is, well, actually, they're brothers. Yin and Yang, Hawk replied. See, the theme is light and darkness. It's a very advanced book. Part 12, Yin and Yang. Yin, Yang shouted. What now, Yang? There are people at the door, Yang shouted louder. Yes, I know, and I'm upstairs. Did you hear the dog just ring a bell? My dad taught the dog how to ring a bell when he wants to go outside. Yin, Yang shouted. What now, Yang? There are people at the door, Yang shouted louder. Yes, I know, and I'm upstairs. You are closer to the door, Yin shouted. Well, Lance, Hawk said, they're definitely home. Humor. Yang opened the door. He was younger than Lance expected, about 20 or so. Who are you? Yang asked. I am Lance. I know what you need, Yang interrupted. You seek the Temple of Darkness. He's a philosopher. He knows these things. Yes, Lance said. Do you know where it is? No. But Yin does. But Yin does, he said. Yin, he shouted. We need you. I'm coming, Yin said. Yin was about 20 as well. Let me guess. You seek the Temple of Darkness. It's in Shadow Isle. Thank you, but how do we get there? Lance asked. Follow us, Yin and Yang said simultaneously. They walked down to the harbor in town. That is how we get there, Yang said, pointing to a boat. It says to a bout, but I think he meant boat. Ain't she a beauty, Yin said. Well, get on, Yang said. So they boarded. They boarded this stranger's boat. This child boarded the stranger's. Part 13, War Plans. Lie, Corruption shouted. Yes, my lord, he replied. How many dead Dust Riders do we have? I need an exact number for the Treaty of War, Corruption explained. How courteous to warn the enemy ahead of time. Yes, sir, we have 3,005,385 troops and 6 million more on the way coming through Shadow Isle, Lai said. Send word for 500 to get off the ship and guard the temple, Corruption ordered. Yes, my lord, Lai said. I don't think I knew how numbers worked when I was 8. I think I just saw the Battle of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings and thought, that's like 5 million people. Part 14, The Voyage. The first night on Yin and Yang's boat, the Dragonfly, was almost perfect. Lance explained Hawk and his quest. Yin and Yang were fascinated. So, Yin asked, where are your parents? Well, Lance said, my dad was a soldier in the last Great War, the war that Lance had previously never heard of. He died in battle. My mom was a nurse and was killed by a straight arrow. That's when my master Frederick took me in. Really, he's my uncle, but I was his apprentice. We were blacksmiths. I thought you were a stable boy. Interesting, Yin said. Fascinating, Yang stated. So, what about you guys? Hawk asked. Well, we were born on the same day in Rustafar, far away from here, Yang said. Yet you're twins! Our parents were philosophers, and we took after them, Yin said. We moved to Vetrosaint because of its rich history, Yang explained. We love the story of the Dark War, Yin said. The war that Lance has still never heard of. Could you please tell me about the war? Lance asked. Yes, but first, what's Hawk's story? Yin asked. Do I ever explain the war? Did I just have no idea? World building. Well, I was born a farmer. We finally made enough money, and I went to military school and inherited Hawk from my father, Hawk said. Okay, Yin said. Now the Dark War... Oh, here we go. The Dark War started when... Yin! Yang shouted. What? He replied. We have company. I'm never gonna explain the war, Yang said, pointing to a dead Dusk Rider ship in the distance. Douse the lanterns, Yin replied. Part 15, The Defense. King John, Barnaby shouted. Yes, Barnaby, King John said. We have received a treaty of war from corruption. He has more than 3 million men. How many troops are in the Royal Army? John asked. He doesn't... It's your army. No more than 3,000, Barnaby replied. Then gather every able-bodied man in the kingdom. Yes, my lord. Barnaby, yes. These are dark times. Prepare for the worst. Part 16, Sea Battle. The enemy sailed closer and closer. What now? Asked Lance. I, for the first time, don't know, Yin said. Me neither, Yang said. Well, I do, Hawk said. What do we do? They all said at once. Yin, Yang, can you two fight? Of course, we fenced as kids, they said. Of course they can fight. Stupid question. Well, go get swords, Hawk commanded. Yes, sir. Reminder, Hawk is a sword. They are talking to this angry sword. Go get swords. Yes, sir, Yang said as he ran to get swords. Other way, Yang, Yin shouted. Sir, this is now on the boat, the enemy boat. Sir, the zombie-like dead Dusk Rider asked, what are we doing? We, the captain replied, are going to stop that boy with the swords on that ship. Shall I ready the men? Yes, the captain said. Boys, the DDR shouted to the crew. Get your swords and guns. I guess they are pirates now. The dead Dusk Riders sailed closer. Lance started to panic. Then, on the enemy's ship, he saw a dead Dusk Rider take out a long metal tube and point it at the ship. There was a loud pop, and the end of the tube shot out sparks, and the spot right next to Lance suddenly shattered, and there was a lead ball embedded on the deck. It's a gun! Oh no! Part 17, Knife Master. Did I skip 16? No, I didn't. Corruption. What lie? Knife Master is here. Send him in. Yes, sir. A man in a brown cloak walked in. So, the man said, what you want from me? I need you to kill someone. What's in it for me? Matona, the magic dagger. I like knives, Knife Master said. So do we have a deal? Okay. They shook hands. How polite. World building! Character depth. I am a master of all these things. Part 18, Battle. As the dead Dusk Rider ship grew closer, Lance started to panic. He had never fought this many people before. Another shot came from the strange metal tube the enemy was armed with. It did not seem to have much accuracy. That was good. Time period accurate guns. Smooth bore. Woo! Prepare to board, the DDR commander shouted. Yes, Captain, the crew replied. Lieutenant, the captain shouted. Get over here. What do you request, sir? The lieutenant replied. Go get my sword! Yes, my lord. Yin, Yang, Lance shouted. They are getting closer. They're getting boarding ramps. Don't worry, lad. Yin has a crossbow, Yang shouted from the steering wheel. Just as Yang finished speaking, Yin fired the crossbow and a DDR on the ship fell into the water, along with one of the ramps. One of the 5 ramps. There's 5 boarding ramps. Yin fired again, but missed. Too late to reload, Yin. They're almost here. Draw your sword, Hawk shouted as the first of the ramps hit the deck. As DDRs marched across, Lance drew Hawk and Matona. He shot 3 DDRs with fire, and then raised Matona and used one of the 2 tries to knock out 20 Dead Dusk Riders, but there were still 77 to go. Math! Meanwhile, Yin was still shooting. He had knocked out 2 ramps, only 1 left. I guess he's up in the crow's nest or something. Yang was desperately trying to steer and stay alive. He had killed 3 DDRs so far. After 1 whole night of fighting, only 10 DDRs were left, but Lance had suffered a large scar on his right arm. You see, it's important that our heroes learn loss to humanize them. So, Lance gets a boo-boo. Loss. Now we board them, Yin said. Lance raised Matona and shot the bright light. 6 DDRs fell. It was 20 before. Why is it 6 now? Thank you, Lance, Yang said. Only 4 left now. They know how many are on the boat before they've boarded the... Part 19. The captain. I'm sorry, I spelled it wrong. Part 14. The Captain. When Lance, Yin, Yang, and Hawk entered the captain's cabin, it was the first time Lance ever got a good look at the DDRs. They were almost zombie-like, wearing black steel armor, each armed with a strange metal tube, a sword, and a small round shield. The captain had a mask. He's been fighting them all night, and now he sees their faces? This one's wearing a mask! So you want me to surrender, the captain asked. No. We recommend you surrender, Yin replied. I would rather... ... Die! Fine! Yin grabbed a pistol from a dead DDR behind him. Before the zombie could stop him, Yin shot the captain dead. Then they drew their blades and wiped out the remaining DDRs. Take the weapons and the armor, Yin commanded. I'll figure out the tube on the dragonfly. He's gonna reverse engineer the gun and change the tide of the war. He's a philosopher. Part 20, Shadow Isle. Shadow Isle was a group of 3 small islands. Corruption, Lie, and Shadow were the islands' names. They were owned by Corruption and Lie. The sword is on Shadow Island, Yin said as he brought the dragonfly into port. Lance, Yin, and Yang put on DDR armor and then it just has an empty entire line, so I was going to fill in something there. I don't know. It was and something. Then I go on to explain. The captain armor luckily had a mask, so Lance wore the mask. Disguises. Do you think the outfits will fool the DDR that patrolled the island? Lance asked. I don't know, Yin said as he put face paint on himself and Yang so they would look like Dead Dusk Riders. Luckily, they did work. So Lance, Yang, and Yin got into the temple very easily. There were no guards inside. Aren't there 500 people guarding this temple? Where are the 500 people? They went down the stairs. In the main chamber, a cloaked figure was standing. It's Knife Master. The man swung his arm, and out of his sleeve, a knife shot out and cut the rope behind Lance that was holding the door open, and the stone door slid shut, so Lance was alone with the man. My name's Knife Master, he said, and it ain't a pleasure to meet ya. Oh, I like this character. Part 21, Knife Master. Knife Master slid a chain with a dagger at the end of it out of his sleeve and swung it. It knocked Lance's mask off. He swung again. Lance grabbed the chain and pulled it out of Knife Master's hand and flung it to the ground. Knife Master went over to the sword Illumo. and pulled a lever that was next to it. Parts of the floor opened up, and holes were about 8 feet deep. And holes were about 50 deep. Brilliant writing. And some had lava in them. These holes lead to a network of tunnels under the town, Knife Master said as he drew a dagger. Lance drew Matona. Knife Master charged Lance and stabbed and hit Knife Master in the left shoulder. I caught you off guard so quickly it's almost sad, Lance bragged. Then he pushed Knife Master into a hole, grabbed a Lumo, shut the trapdoors, and opened the door. That might be the most gripping fight scene of all time. Part 22, Detest, Sword of Darkness. Okay, Yang said as the dragonfly left port. The next sword... What about the 500 orcs? Dead Dusk Riot, whatever they're called. Okay, Yang said as the dragonfly left port. The next sword is in the Temple of Light. It is the Dark Sword Detest. It means hate. Edgy. Where is it? Lance asked. He just told you. Mount Lumo, back in Vetro Saint. Why didn't you get that one first? Part 23, The Army. King John! Barnaby shouted. Yes, he replied. We now have 2 million soldiers now. Almost as much as corruption, Barnaby said. I thought he had like 9 million. Didn't he have 6 million more on the way? Where did we get so many? King John asked. Well, I did as you said and got all the able-bodied men. And then Vetro, which is another country. There's Vetro and Vetro Saint. I had a whole map. Then Vetro sent help. Good. Part 24. Home. The dragonfly docked in Vetro Saint, and Yin and Yang and Lance stepped... Oh, so many hands. Stepped off the gangplank and walked to the castle. The drawbridge opened. Lance, Yin and Yang marched into the throne room. King John, Lance said as he bowed. You too, the king said, pointing at Yin and Yang. Who are you? Who are you? We are Yin and Yang, Yin said. As Yin and Yang explained, Lance walked to the room with the painting. Lance looked around for clues. Nothing. Lance, the king called. Yes, my lord, Lance asked as he entered the room. I will prepare your friends with horses. I think I meant to say provide. Jupiter is waiting in the stable. Thank you, my lord, Lance said as he and Yin and Yang left. Part 25, Up the Mountain. Yin and Yang chose the horses named... Yin and Yang chose the horses named Yin and Yang. I wonder if Yin has Yang and Yang has Yin. They rode out of town and started up the mountain. It was smaller than Glisse Mountain, only about 2 hours up. Nothing happened on the journey. At the top, there was a temple that looked like the one on Glisse, only it was white and made of stone. Of course there was a hut. They lit a fire, put their horses in, and went to the temple. Part 26, The Monster. As Yin, Lance, and Yang walked, out of the shadows came a familiar sight for Lance. A madman with punching knives on his hands. He punched with his left hand, and the knife shattered. Lance cut the right hand off. Not again, Lance said. Again, Yin said. Long story, Lance said. They walked, and in the chamber there was a monster who looked just like the one from Glisse, only white. But this is the Sword of Darkness, so wouldn't the matching monster be at the Sword of Light that he already... Why would... Maybe it's because they're both mountain creatures. Maybe this creature is, like, native to the mountains. I don't understand. It attacked with one of its little swords. Lance dodged and cut the arm off. The monster hit with its claw. Lance dodged. He drew Hawk and Pluto. He burned and froze the beast. And took Detest for himself. My dog is barking. Part 27, Total Warfare. Lance returned to the castle. Lance, the DDR army is only 10 minutes away. Put this armor on, King John said as he handed armor to Lance, Yin, and Yang. Sir! Barnaby ran into the room. They're here! Lance, Yin, Yang, John, and Barnaby ran to the balcony. There were thousands of DDRs. Precisely 9 million. The 2 monsters Lance had defeated, and the 2 madmen with punching knives and 1 arm each. They came back for the big fight. King John, I still need the rest of Matona, Lance said. No time, John replied. Then a loud boom as the DDRs fired their guns. Send out the men, King John shouted. 3 million soldiers marched from the castle gate. Lance watched in horror as the epic battle unfolded before his eyes. Thousands of innocent men were dying. Lance ran to the battlefield. He saw a terrifying sight. A man, clad in black armor, with horns on his helmet. Next to him, a man with one eye. Lie. The armored man drew his sword. Impossible, Lance screamed at Corruption. Part 28, Darkness Destiny form. Corruption's sword had no tip, and it had the name Matona, Darkness Destiny form, carved into it. Lance... Lance drew Hawk. He shot Lie in the leg with fire. Lie screamed and fell to the ground. Corruption raised his sword and hit down. Lance parried. Lance swung. Corruption blocked. Lance shot fire. Corruption shot shadows. The shots collided and exploded, knocking Lance down. Corruption hit down. Lance swung Hawk, and Corruption's helmet fell off. Dad, Lance said, staring at Corruption. Son, he said. His voice was soft. He pulled a purple rock from his pocket. Goodbye, son, he said as he disappeared. He was winning. And he ran away. Part 29, the end. As Lie lay on the ground in pain after the DDRs had retreated, he saw a man walk towards him. Ya work for me now, the man said. Lie replied, Yes, Knife Master. The end. Epilogue. Lance became a hero and Vetro Saint, but he was not done. He vowed to find his father and get the rest of Matona. Yin Yang and Hawk vowed to help him. Then I have a map, and then it says, tune in for Swordmaster 2, Revenge / The Swords of Destiny. Somebody please go and draw this out as a comic book. I beg of you.